Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshenu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. All right, we're in Bamidbar, aka Numbers, page 769. So the first thing that happened is I looked up the beginning of this Torah portion and saw the census and said, how the hell did I read it today?
What do you think the bar mitzvah boy is saying?
Oh, God.
Depends, maybe he's a math whiz.
Yeah, maybe. Never know.
So there is a really rather interesting anthropological issue that comes up later on in the portion, which I really did want to talk about. But I thought it might be worthwhile just kind of ruminating for a few minutes on the whole point of the census and how it's done and what it means and so on. So I'll just begin very quickly. On the first day of the second month, in the second year following the Exodus. So this is still the first generation, right? We haven't gone through the 38 years and the death of all that generation. So this is a year.
We haven't had the golden calf yet.
I think we did because Moses went up to the mountain. This is the second year, I think, after. Huh?
Of course you did, Ron. That's shortly after.
I mean, in the book we have, but.
Yeah, no, because this is the second year, so
The
this
second-
happened.
Yeah, okay, this is a year later, okay.
What am I
Never
trying to say?
mind.
Second year.
Are you finished now, can I?
No, doesn't matter.
I'm never finished.
Dear. On the first day of the second month in the second year of the Exodus from the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. So we're still in the wilderness. In the tent of meeting. Does this mean that the Mishkan is now kind of up and running?
A month prior.
Okay, so
Yes.
yeah, so the tabernacle is up and there's just starting to kind of get ready to do the tabernacle thing, right? So in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, saying, take a census of the whole Israelite community by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names of every male head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their group from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. So let's just stop for a second. What's going on here and why?
Well, for one thing, to say that anybody who can bear arms are, you're excluding a lot of people.
Like all the women?
Well, they wouldn't let the women bear arms, women could bear, but I'm
Well,
talking
sure,
about
women
people
could.
who are handicapped in some way.
Right.
Basically, it's saying how big of an army can we raise?
Yeah, how big an army? Here you are in the middle of the wilderness, a huge, massive group of people. And we're worrying about an army?
They already needed one once. Amalek.
That's later.
That was the first year, I thought.
I thought that was when they're ready to.
So that listing, that means that they were running in.
Right. So, are they putting together an army?
You're trying to like lean the sense of order,
Okay.
right? I mean, this is about uniformity, order. The tribes are gonna be, presenting gifts and offerings, and they're all the same, and there's a certain feeling of order here. And with the military, with the chain of command, with everyone walking together,
Right.
as opposed to the rest of the book, starting, I think, in chapter 11, where you have total chaos.
Right. So there is something military about this. I want to look at the numbers a little bit. I forget where the numbers are. And yeah. And it does say, if you look at the end of chapter 1, I'm on page 774. Levites, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall put it up. Any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. I want to come back to that. The Israelites shall encamp troop by troop, each man with his division and each under his standard. So there is a kind of attempt to create a military hierarchy, right?
Oh, it's less of a hierarchy because, they're all sort of treated equally here.
Well,
It's like God doesn't want to show favoritism. Some one of the commentators
Right.
said.
Although you have some organizations.
right, maybe organization is a better word.
But they don't have a permanent place,
That's right.
so they have to actually the government with the priest. But that's.
But
and
the
not
priest is,
trying to do anything.
the priest is inside the tabernacle or inside the tent of meeting.
Yeah.
Right, he's not gonna be riding around inspecting the troops, right? Yeah,
So I'm not upset with the terminology that makes it seem militaristic, but if this was truly reforming an army, there would be calls to building arms. There'd be maneuvers that were being discussed. So it wouldn't simply be this organization, which we're saying, if it was organizing for armies. So perhaps this is the only model or the language that's available to discuss organization.
right. And that may be it. I'm a little struck by the 20 years old, and maybe we can talk about that. Why not 13, right? Because that's.
This is a
Not growing.
Well,
Teenager.
well, teenagers can bear arms and, I mean, we're not talking about sophisticated weapons here, right?
Just as a sidelight, on page 770, we have a name here that's Shador, which is the one of the rookie quarterbacks for the Browns.
Is that his first thing?
First name.
He's probably not it from here.
Yeah.
Sure. What's the reason?
They took all their names from all the strange.
Oh, that is right.
And we're taking them too. I mean, if you look at some of the Hebrew names today.
Yeah.
They are. Noah is a girl, things like that, are all the Bible.
So the total number is 603,000. I'm not sure I believe that number. I think there's other ways of, but
anybody.
huh? Yeah. But that's of male arm bearing folks, which is what, a third, maybe a quarter of the whole community. So we're talking about 2 million people.
Excluded that theory, Levi.
Yeah, the Levites are not counted. I want to come back to that too. So this is, whatever the number is, it's several thousand. I don't think it's 600,000 or 2.1 million or anything. But yeah, you have to get them organized. When we move, this tribe is here, this tribe is here, this tribe is here, right on the different sides of the tabernacle. This is all laid out. So you need a certain sense of organization for the tribes to gather together under their flag or under their standard and to be at the right place at the right time so everybody can move out. Anybody who's had 2 or 3 kids and tries to get everybody in the car for vacation, right? You know the problem with 5 or 6 people, right? Imagine like 6,000 or 8,000. It's gotta have been a mess.
And they want to be somebody.
Right, right. Because just a year ago, they were slaves.
Right, they've been out for 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the sense of needing an organization and maybe needing an accounting, who's in and who's out. Because I often wonder, there are all these Egyptian sutlers, not settlers, sutlers, tradespeople selling them stuff, candy bars and chewing gum and whatever. And so you got to sort out who's an Egyptian sutler, who's really part of the Israelite, which tribe do you belong to, get everybody sort of enrolled and.
Well, interestingly, when you had the census, I always call them the riffraff, the non-Israelites
Yeah.
that went with them, they're not counted, they're not talked about, they go nowhere.
Or have they been absorbed?
Or have they all disappeared already?
Well, that's the question. If they've been absorbed into a clan that's part of a tribe, blah, 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 right? So maybe this is also a way of just sort of sorting out, who are all these people out here?
Right,
I mean, how do you know who's a spy? They have no allegiance to.
Right, right,
Those are the ones that are called Arab routes.
yeah,
right, they're in the wilderness by Midbar, right?
correct.
It's a sort of a it's a rite of passage. You know, it's also described as liminal space.
Right.
Right, and they're not at their destination, they left Egypt and they're on their way to Canaan, but they're in the wilderness. They need to develop an identity. Who are they? You know, they're not quite a people yet. They've received the laws, but it's a in between
Yeah,
time, like Jacob when he was traveling.
right. So we
from-
can understand they need to organize, yeah.
Right.
Did you have a?
Yeah, I just want to get my timeline straight here. Has God mentioned to us yet that when we enter the land, we have to go into battle?
No.
So
This
we
is a
don't
different-
even.
This is a generation
Right, I just
later.
wondered, because I didn't know if that was the reason why they set up an army.
Yeah, it just, maybe this is the model they had for how you organize a whole bunch of people. Another interpretation of trying to understand these numbers is that words like Elif, which is 1,000, could also have been a small military unit, an Elif, a Mea, 100. And that what we're talking about is not 600,000, but 600 Elifs, like a squad or a team or a platoon or something like that. And that when it says, 6,500, it means 6 Elifs, right? Which includes 5 smaller units. And if you do that, the number gets vaguely more realistic. What could have possibly come out?
What is realistic? People in the desert,
Yeah,
how do you keep? Even 6,000 people together,
right,
and you're not even including women
right.
or the children.
Or the teenagers, right? Right. No, it is a problem. So I think taking Elif as a kind of military unit, instead of 600,000, you have 600 of these little units, makes more sense. So this tribe has 12 of these units, this tribe has 5 of these units, and so forth. So that's another way of looking at that. I mean, this is speculation, but it may help us get the numbers down to something that's halfway reasonable.
I forgot the name of the guy, he died like a year or two ago, and he wrote a book about, short book, 250 pages, about each group of each civilization, and he described the Jews in the Midbar as really a very small, what's the word, they were nothings.
Right. Bunch of wandering Bedouin, really.
Grasshoppers.
People actually got their act together,
Right.
and so that makes much more sense than thinking of these people in the desert as a strong person, If they were so strong, they wouldn't have sent the 12 spies and listened to just two,
Rabbi, if we accept the miracle of the manna, then how do we determine what's reasonable anyway, other than with respect to what we might or might not know about the Egyptian population and how many slaves they might have had at all, keeping in mind that not all of their slaves would have been Israelite slaves?
Right. I mean, we don't know, right? None of us were there. I mean, we're speculating on what a number could be, what would sound reasonable for keeping people in the desert. But yeah, I mean, this is speculation. Yeah,
I read an interesting analytical analysis, and they said if it was 2, 3 million Israelites leaving Egypt, forget the Red Sea for a moment, if they were marching at a certain rate or walking at a certain rate and were certainly double deep by the time the first Jews got to Sinai, the last ones had yet to leave Egypt. Just
Oh, yeah.
the physicality of all of that. So
right.
it calls into question, just practicality.
You also have the problem that you could have had a group arrive at the borders of the promised land while they were still groups at Sinai, You may remember the 6-Day War when the Israelis were coming across Sinai Peninsula, that many of them were already fighting on the canal before some of the other units had left the border area. So, yeah, I mean,
Does it matter?
I don't know.
Not theologically.
Yeah, theologically, it doesn't matter, but I'm just saying that when we're talking about so many elephs, we may not be talking about thousands, we may be talking about something much smaller. And what I used to tell my undergrad students is think of the Roman century in the army, 100 men led by centurion. By classical times, there weren't 100 men in a century. The name stuck, but the numbers had changed. There was much less. But it's still called a century. So maybe we have something like that going on here. Or not.
What we do know is that they have the 10 commandments. They receive the commandments, they have the law, and they've been given
And they have oral Torah, right?
And they
So
have-
they have the Mishnah and the Talmud.
You're saying right now.
Right, but they know what they're, they have the mitzvot, okay, and they know what they're supposed to do, but they're still slaves in a sense, in a very real sense. They're here in the desert, with God, with the Mishkan, but they haven't really shed that slave mentality yet.
Oh, and we get lots of examples of that when God says, collect twice on the 6th day because nothing's coming down on the manna, right? Nothing's coming down on the 7th day. And people say, yeah, right. And they go out on the 7th day. Or they consort with foreign women.
Right,
or,
right.
Lots of complaining.
Lots of complaining.
It started early.
Well, I mean, you can just imagine. So,
I think that's an interesting point, though, that we do not. We talk about the complaints in Roman, or Greek history when we learn it. They don't talk so much about the complainers are. It's a much more negative thing. In other words, they don't think of them as being anything constructive. Am I right? You're the one who's.
yeah,
an expert.
yeah. For the Romans, you mean?
Yeah, for the Romans or the Greeks, we don't really hear much about, but the Roman history.
Yeah, well, both had actual armies. I mean, they had organized actual.
That's what we see people who complain because they took them down faster than the Jews would have.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, people were sent into exile, the Greeks had these council of elders where everybody argued everything out, the Roman Senate. I mean, there were dissidents, right? I mean.
Now, another interesting way to look at this is they have their freedom, okay, but can they handle the freedom? Can they live with the freedom? Or because, as we know, they descend into chaos very quickly, right, in the book of Numbers. So the question is, how do you balance order and freedom?
Right. So I think, and I didn't want to over belabor the point, but I think the idea of this, why a census and what do the numbers mean, I think are important. Just how do you organize this group and get them from being just a bunch of slaves who are out in the desert into an organized group around the Mishkan, right? And each tribe has its place and each tribe does
Right,
its.
so at this particular point, we see that they hearken to Moses and God's word. They're responding.
Well, they're listening to the
positive,
tribal leaders, I mean,
but it's not gonna last long.
done. But it's an attempt, and I think that's what we're seeing here. So there's one tribe that's not counted. So, one comment I sometimes get, wait, we have 12 tribes that are counted. And then we have the tribe of Levi, really 13 tribes?
Well, no, everybody's making 12 no matter which way you count.
Yes.
Which proves to you that the numbers mean nothing in this book.
Right, so, yeah. So, I mean, there is a Greek, a Greco-Roman tradition of groups of people, tribes getting together, and it's always 12. So no matter who you count, you end up with 12.
In Genesis with
Right.
Ishmael's has 12 sons or
So
something.
12 is one of them darn
Dina
numbers.
doesn't have a tribe. Dina,
Dina's not a boy.
Right,
she was
He's
one,
not a man.
she was one children.
right. And should there be a tribe of Dinah? Maybe, but it didn't happen.
So all her what happened to her descendants? She married into one of the.
She married into one of the tribes and bang, yeah. Yeah, and that's what happens with all intermarriages. I mean, this is another issue. I don't know how much we want to get into all of this, but I mean, what happens in the Jubilee year? So people are intermarrying, you go to the bar at night, you meet a nice woman or you meet a nice guy and you get married and he's from this tribe and she's from that tribe and so, right? And where does the land go? Or think of the daughters of Tzlafchad, right? Jubilee, all the land goes back to zero, right? To where we were. So the tribal and clan lands are never alienated. Right? But I bet there was a lot of intermarriage back and forth between families, between clans, even between tribes, even with Israelites and non-Israelites.
Well, that's the story.
Right. Right. Well, Ezra, when he says, get rid of your foreign wives, what foreign wives? They're the native women, right? So anyway, yeah. So are there 13 tribes? 12 plus Levi, right?
Well, aren't the Levi's sole job to oversee the tabernacle?
Yes.
I mean, they are just they do the holy work, spiritual side.
Right. So, just to follow that up, what we've got here is we've got 12 tribes that are gonna go into the land, and each one of them gets an land allocation. The tribe of Levi does not get an allocation.
They get cities.
Well, they have cities because they have to live somewhere.
They get the Temple Mount.
Well, they get, yeah, and they have a permanent job. And they eat meat every day, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, I think we're seeing that number 12 is a little bit artificial. If we take Levi out, we have to put somebody in their place. You know how we did that? Right, we take out Joseph, that leaves 2 spots. We put in Manasseh and Ephraim. We've got 12. Tribe of Levi here is the 13th tribe, right? It's the tribe that sort of doesn't fit in. I want to go, if you go to Numbers 3, I'm on page 778. 778. At the bottom, it's verse 11. I think this is worth talking about. So, well, let me start up in the top. I think we've talked about this before, but the danger of the holy place, that commoners who come in contact with the holy place get zapped, right? Maybe that's what happened with Nadav and Avihu, that's a different Torah portion. But we do know, even at Sinai, if God is present, commoners need to stay away. Well, then how do you mediate that difference, right? Like who takes sacrifices from people and gives them to God? Who has that liminal situation? Well, turns out to be the tribe of Levi, right? But let me read a little bit of this, and then I think we need to talk about what's going on. So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, advance the tribe of Levi and place them in attendance upon Aaron and the priest to serve him. So here's the picture you should have. Aaron and the priests are the ones who go inside the Mishkan, right? Inside the Holy of Holies. They handle the sacrifices and all that. So they can't, they're at a level of holiness where they can't really touch the other people, right? They're sequestered in this Holy of Holies, so to speak. The people who can contact them and commoners are now the Levites. So the Levites can't go all the way in where the priests, right? But they can't go all the way out to where the people are. You see what I'm saying? They're liminal.
Are almost more important than the Kohanim in the sense that there are more of them roaming around and interacting.
Right.
According to all this.
Right. So, but let me go on, because there's something else going on here. So, they shall perform duties for him, for the priest, and for the whole community before the tent of meeting during the work of the tabernacle. They shall take charge of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, a duty on behalf of the Israelites during the work of the tabernacle. So the Israelites have nothing to do with the tabernacle person, especially the Mishkan. Right, and later on, we see when the whole group migrates, right, when they're walking, each tribe has something they have to pick up and carry with them and reassemble. The holy stuff is only the tribe of Levi, and it has to be covered because even they have to be protected. So it has to have these radiation blankets thrown over, whatever it is, right? So, but the Levites are the only ones who can even get that close.
I'm not sure if that's an honor or a punishment. Because when they were working, when they were going through the desert, they were the only ones that actually had a job. Everybody else just sat around and took care of themselves.
Right.
And they had to not only sit around and take care of themselves, but they had to take care of the tabernacle and the priests.
And they worked.
So I'm thinking it's almost like a punishment as opposed to an honor.
Well, on the one hand, they worked. I mean, they really did work.
Yeah.
You're right. On the other hand, they were supported by, let's say, tax dollars, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I said it jokingly, but I'm not sure it's a joke. They did eat meat probably 3 times a day, right? I have this image of biblical Israelites with all the farmers and stuff and all kind of thin, and then you got the priests and they're all crepuscular, and because they've been eating, meat and
They're
all
all
this.
dying early.
Why did
Yeah, they all died at age 35
But why did the Levites need meat? Why did they need the meat? They were getting manna too, weren't they?
They were getting everything. I mean, they were.
Were they actually doing sacrifices while they were in the
They
desert?
weren't doing sacrifices, but they were cleaning up. We've all licked dishes after meals, right? I mean, come on. And the stuff left over on the altar. I mean,
The firstborn is the firstborn of the mother. That's the one who can become the Levite.
I'm getting there. Yeah. I mean, good insight. Let's come back to that. So let me just, they shall take charge of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, a duty on behalf of the Israelites during the work of the tabernacle, right? You shall assign the Levites to Aaron and to his sons. They are formally assigned to him from among the Israelites. So they are not a tribe, right? They are assigned to Aaron, okay? You shall make Aaron and his sons responsible for observing their priestly duties, and any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. Again, they're the, what do you call it? The liminal group, right? The,
Elite,
huh?
elite,
Yeah, well, elite,
specialized.
yeah. They're like the bureaucracy that you have to go to instead of the guy who's in charge, right? So they're the insulation. Does that work? Okay. They're the middle management. The Lord spoke to Moses saying,
Excuse me, where are you?
I'm in verse 12. This is page 778. It's like the paragraph, the last 3 lines of 778. So verse 11. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the Israelites. The Levites shall be mine. For every firstborn is mine. At the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, man and beast, to myself, to be mine, the Lord's. I think that needs some unpacking. What is going on here?
Somebody's gotta be, this first of all, he's following the practice that was common in the civilization. The firstborn always had some special.
All right, so the firstborn is obviously special, and we know later on the firstborn always gets a double portion and blah, 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 blah.
Here is the firstborn of the mother. But they had the father, the firstborn of the father gets the inheritance. What if he had?
And your
two
problem
wives?
is, yeah,
If he had two wives, who gets the inheritance?
right.
In other words, he may not really have liked the first wife.
Or the first son, or the first,
Yeah.
yeah,
But the firstborn was to be given to God, right? So
right.
that was very unrealistic. Because, I mean.
Everything
yeah, So the Levites replaced.
Right,
that
and I want to get to that, because I think that tells us something really interesting about the Levites.
I guess I just still see it as God's hand is still in this process as we, you know,
Which process?
the formation of the nation.
Ah,
So, you know, as it was with our patriarchs, make the matches, and this person doesn't get that, and move the hand this way and that, which we always, and we felt by the time we got here, we were done with that with God, but now we see a very direct desire to put his people, like this we discussed, in the right place at the right time, changing the natural order from the firstborn of the father to get the inheritance, now to firstborn of the mother, having this special leave, which maybe is a shift in what's important in life.
could be,
Could be.
but
Is it firstborn son or a firstborn daughter, or did it matter?
here it says firstborn,
Of the womb, so it's gotta be of the woman.
right?
What she says.
And I think there's a really important thing going on here because it's the woman's firstborn.
But it says, well,
So that,
when they're doing the counting, it's a zachar, it's definitely the man.
Oh, the counting is the man.
Yeah, definitely the man.
it's always a
The
woman.
firstborn, is it the firstborn son?
No.
Yeah.
We don't-
Well, you don't have to be Jewish to kind of figure that part out.
I know that
Right,
very important in Judaism, for example, a man can get married after 3 months, a woman has to wait, what, 9? Because we don't know. in
I
3
think
months-
it's,
True.
right. But there's something else going on here, I think, about the holiness of the firstborn of the womb. This is different than inheritance and all of that.
She's adopted.
So a woman had a
Adopted is another issue. What I want to ask is, what's the big deal about the firstborn of the womb and why do the Levites become that? Right? Doesn't that tell you something about the Levites and why they're not a tribe?
I'm thinking, it basically, God is saying that when it came to the 10th plague, he passed up, he did not kill the firstborn son of the Israelites.
Israelites.
And so he could have, and maybe
Of course.
his wife pulling back his anger saying, I shouldn't have done that, I didn't. And therefore, to replace that, he will serve me. So it's still a way of making up for that, to make them separate, make them holy.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important here that what God does, the 10th plague, is kill the firstborn of the Egyptians. So I think we're dealing with a more universal issue of firstborn of the wombs are very special and have a consecrated status. It's not that God, well, I'm gonna kill a couple of Egyptian kids. It's the firstborn, right? And now your firstborn have to be redeemed.
Yeah, but what didn't we, in the book of Genesis, we combat that concept of the importance of the priority of the firstborn. And we, it's about merit. You know, it's not the firstborn. I mean, that's, Jacob struggled with Esau, you know, he was second and, you know, on down the line.
Right, so I mean, there's two different things going on here. There is the
Primogeniture.
holiness, consecratedness or whatever of the firstborn of the womb. Then there's all the laws about inheritance and first sons and second sons and brothers. And I mean, that's a whole different, that's for the property law, you know, lawyers.
Right.
But the firstborn of the womb is anthropologically very important. Because what does the firstborn of the womb tell us about the woman? She's fertile
Yeah, success.
and
Success and
Guru or-
ability.
she's fertile, she can get pregnant.
Mine can start.
Yeah,
What comes next? So she's pregnant,
Children,
you know.
children,
she has living children.
but that's another question. What happens if the kid dies?
It's not a firstborn.
Today, but,
No, but I think the point is, and this is the anthropological sort of angle. A firstborn of the womb means the woman is able to bear living children, and that was not a given. Right? So it represents a kind of status. Right?
Wouldn't the status be to the woman?
Yeah, well, it certainly symbolizes something for them, but that child itself then becomes very special. Exactly.
Yeah, but what does it really mean? I mean, the firstborn, does that mean somehow the firstborn has more talent or more strength? Or is like, you know, the parents are younger so that they have more strength to
Not
at
necessarily.
that point in their lives? What does it really?
That's what the
mean?
firstborn keeps saying.
This is
But-
It's- Right,
it's firstborn,
Of course.
anything special.
right. This is the idea of primogeniture.
Right.
Right? I mean, and it goes.
No, this is not.
The king, it's the firstborn son inherits the kingship.
That's a little bit different, because again,
It's
there's two stati. One is this firstborn of the womb represents human fertility, successful human fertility. And therefore is a special gift by God and therefore has to be redeemed from God. What happens next about inheritance and so on is a whole different mess of problems.
It hasn't changed yet.
No, and it probably won't, but I think the importance of the firstborn as actually representing God's gift of fertility makes the firstborn of the womb special.
But what's wrong with the secondborn?
Nothing is wrong.
Isn't he just this?
The first one comes out and the first one is alive and survives, right? That's special. All right, then there's another one and another one and another one. Till you figure out what's causing it and you stop, right? But the firstborn is symbolically, anthropologically very significant because not all women are fertile, could get pregnant, could deliver live births. So if the woman can do that, that
That is not
viable.
really viable. Look, someone. It's a bad shape. Most likely they didn't survive,
Right.
but today it could be, say, well, some.
Okay, so let me throw this in. How old does the firstborn, whatever, the child have to be to have shown survivability beyond,
8 days.
wait.
1 month.
30 days.
Before the child has shown that person can survive all childhood diseases?
30 days.
No. 13 or 20.
Oh, inscription.
Right. So once you hit 20, you're you're beyond all the childhood diseases, you're all beyond all the teenage diseases and all the teenage mishigas. Now you're an adult at 20, now we count you. And now you become part of the people.
It's not, it mentions tribal.
Can you speak up, please?
Okay,
Bro,
I can repeat if you want. I can use my outdoor.
I could get the microphone.
Yeah.
mention tribe of Levi, when it changed from tribe to son? Because there was no mention here, like you said, of sons, either firstborn son or serving.
Of the Levites.
Levites.
Right, so I'm gonna say tribe, the tribe of Levi becomes the firstborn of Israel, right? They redeem all the firstborn and they take on that status. So if you think of the hierarchy of holiness, with God on top and all of that, then you have the priests, then the Levites, who are not a tribe, right? They're all the firstborn, all of that special group. And then you have, the people, the commoners, right?
I mean, if they have they have all this mucus and yet only a few of them can do anything.
Right,
They are a tribe or are. well,
no, they're not a tribe.
They're a clan. They're a clan of Levites.
Yeah, so, well, they're a clan or a family, they're a family within a clan within the group of Levites.
Okay, so that is very conceivable for them to disappear as Kohanim.
You mean just,
A few of them, and there are all kinds of restrictions that you can marry and whatnot.
right. So, I mean, this has to become another issue that you may have to make sure the priests marry and have priestlets. I mean, right, I mean, the line has to continue. There's some interesting stuff in the Mishnah and some of the early Tanaitic literature about when the temple comes back, because the Mishnah is now post first temple, right? Well, it's post second temple. That it's the
3/3, yeah.
it's pre-third temple that, God, how much time is left? That
15.
that it's the rabbis who tell the priests what to do. And the implication is the priests don't really understand their job anymore. They don't really know what to do. It's the rabbis who studied the text who figured out exactly how you do this, that, and the other thing. But the rabbis can't do it because they're not priests. So you go to the priest and say, you hold the knife this way, you cut that way, you do this, you do that. Because the priests have to do it right. Otherwise, you've screwed everything up, right? But the priests aren't. The priests don't have the priest's own oral law doesn't count. Let me put it that way.
The priests.
Own oral law, what they learned from dad, who learned it from grandfather, forget that. We rabbis have read the text and you're doing it wrong, which is why we lost the second temple. And we're going to tell you how to do it right when God gives us the third temple. Okay. Well, whatever.
Imagine the arguments that could go on.
Well, we have priests, prophets and kings, sages,
Right.
and each one has his or her own role.
Right. The priests are generally not prophets, right? The priests are only the guys who do the sacrifices.
Right.
And in a way, you can imagine them being restricted to the holy precinct. They can't really step out into the world because then they become contaminated. I mean, even people today who claim they're Kohanim won't go into a graveyard, that sort of thing. So Kohanim and the world don't mix. It's the Levites, right?
The priests established the daily order of things that,
Well, they accomplish the daily order. They do it.
rituals.
But you wonder what they really do today when you think about it. They can't go to cemeteries, they can't go into a hospital. Well, I
No,
know there is dead people there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's an archaic profession now, you know, they're priests or, you know, like, just like you said, the rabbis.
It is like royalty, and you have to be very careful, yeah.
Here.
You know,
Right, and you can imagine if the third temple comes back,
yeah.
all the people claiming to be priests, and who's really a priest and who's not a priest, and who's a Cohen, and who's.
And it's,
Everybody named Katz is a priest, I mean, you know,
if it's the,
Temple. Yeah.
and he'll, yeah, and Elijah will say you, but not you, but yeah.
And we'll know what to do with the fifth line too.
I know we're talking about, oh, they're just this group, but it doesn't seem all that unreasonable to think, I mean, well, a tribe versus a group. I'm not really clear why it's such a big deal outside of the landed areas, that the distinction is all that important. I mean, everyone has a role in Bnei Israel, and this group isn't a negative group. It's pretty positive, as we're saying. So, you know, we say, oh, it's not a tribe, look what they're missing out on. I don't get that.
Yeah, no, I don't, well, what they don't get is an allocation in the land. Right, and that, I think, at this
That's
time
what's
is a
important.
big deal. No land, what, really?
Landowner, you can't vote, you can't do this.
Right.
Okay.
So I think not getting so they're taken out of tribal status and raised to something, to firstborn status. Right? So they have a very different kind of, at this point, a very different kind of reputation and role and holiness
right.
than,
And remember, the book of Leviticus is the key book,
right,
right? It's the middle figure.
Right.
And, you know, it's about the priests, even though they eventually fade away.
You know, there's another role that these Levites are playing in the formation of a unified nation. They are representatives of every tribe.
every tribe.
They've been taken from every tribe. And
They're the firstborn of every tribe, right?
they also are not vulnerable to the accusation of favoritism. They've been taken from every, they're representatives at large.
For the women.
Right. And we know later on when we
Careful when you talk about all us women.
we know later on the Levites have, you know, the Levitical cities, they're scattered around, but they're always Levites, they're not part of the local tribe. Local tribe. So, I mean, the thought I wanted to pursue is that when we do this census, first of all, the numbers have to be interpreted correctly, and I'm not sure it's all that many hundreds of thousands. But second, the censuses of the people, the Levites are taken out of the tribal system and made the firstborn. And I think that firstborn not necessarily has special status, but indicates God's blessing. God's blessing or fertility and growth. And that's, so the Levites become that. And then, of course, the priests above them. And that this is how they're attempting to organize the community. The other way to look at that, if you want to look at the ground pattern, right? You've got concentric circles, priests, Levites, Israelite people, Goyim, right? To use the technical term. In terms of the way that the world is organized, you've got the Mishkan, right? The whole temple, the land of Israel, the rest of the world, and everybody has their place.
So at this time, in this generation, the importance of this is the firstborn is amazing. 40 years later, it's the descendants of those firstborn. They're not taking continually repopulating the Levites with firstborn.
Right.
So in a way, it seems you're setting it up that value that they represented might be lost later in time.
Right.
And it's a surprising way to set it up if you want this to last a long time.
Right.
Which is why.
And you're right.
Doesn't last.
Maybe that doesn't work.
It finally doesn't work. I think it works well enough at the beginning to kind of create a structure for the community. Right? You get into the land, people scatter, well, we know the tribes fought each other. They were under tribal warfare, there's all kind of stuff going on, so. Yeah, but I think here,
It's okay.
Brother, but it's
Well,
No,
we
brothers-
weren't gonna walk through the desert for 40 years, you know, it was a short trip,
right,
right? So perhaps, you know, maybe that's part of the surprise.
it is also the case, we know that the tribe of Levi, when names are named, often have Egyptian names. So there may be some deeper connection with with Egyptian civilization and thinking that gets carried on into this group. And maybe that's the whole idea of the firstborn, which gets mentioned, right? I slew the firstborn of the Egyptians. So we may have a larger thing going on here with the Levites.
This isn't you, I think, the responsibilities.
Yeah, no, I know that. They mentioned that ahead of time. So anyway, that's really what I wanted, the anthropological of this, meaning also that when you survived into adulthood, let's say age 20 or age 13, then you get counted. I'm surprised it's 20 and not 13, but
13,
13 hadn't come up.
they decided 13, like for bar, we didn't have bar mitzvah. It's 20 and it must have been moved up.
yeah, and I don't know exactly why. But I mean, anthropologically, either 13 or puberty, which is roughly the same thing, or 20 seem to be the important dates when, all right, you've survived. You've gotten through all these diseases, you know, measles, whatever.
And yet people yet the Orthodox, for example, will get married at 18 and they consider themselves for that. So it is, the dates are.
Well, and it's, when can you start drinking? When can you get a driver's license? I mean, we can play around with all these things. Voting, but I think when we said 20 and above, that this is also linked in with firstborn and so forth. Right? If you're firstborn, you have indicated the woman can successfully give birth. Right? When you're 20, you've survived childhood. You've survived all these crazy diseases and stuff. Right? And now you're
65, you get social security.
Maybe. 67.
66 they take it away.
67 now.
Was there anything to do with, it used to be that a generation was counted in 20s.
Yeah.
So they,
but or 30s, yeah.
now, yeah, so I guess it would be a connection.
But you're right, yeah, how long is a generation?
Right.
It's it's somewhere between 20 and 30 years, right? So I think what we see here is some really interesting anthropological study of what it means to give birth, to grow up, to be a member of the community and so on and so forth. And how the tribe of Levi fits into that.
Generations are actually 15.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
From a medical point, the firstborn has less diseases than later on with, especially with the blood and stuff like this. So we know, now we know, I don't know if they knew it then, that certain diseases happen after exposure of the fetus to the mother blood and the mother blood to the fetus blood, which is different. And so the next children can be sick, really sick and dying.
Yes.
So that's just an interjection about the firstborn.
And the firstborn is of a successful birth. Yeah, has no guarantee for number 2, number 3, number whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Kinds of things could happen.
Yeah.
But,
So I got a question.
Okay, thank you.
Somewhere else go to.
okay,
In at the beginning of the parsha, it talks about counting, it uses the word misaper.
yeah,
And here, when we get to the Levites, which is the paragraph after the one we stopped at, it uses pekude. Totally different word, both mean
Right.
counting.
Right.
And I'm thinking it's a totally different kind of counting, not just the age, but it's a different kind of count.
and I think, I mean, To me, it sounds like if you say this up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? He's doing. He can also be reporting or appointing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's
You're
different
accounted
accounting.
into this tribe.
Yeah, of course.
An officer altogether?
Yes.
In modern Hebrew use, yeah.
Okay, but going back to the Sapir can be a story too.
That's true.
So you're not counting them, you're collecting their stories.
Sure. That work for you?
I'm just throwing things out.
Okay, thank you all. Shalom.
Things out, right?